afternoon, Prue, from Grace Papers.
Yes. Hi, Penny.
Thank you for joining us today for Futureproof.
Excited to be here.
Hopefully we won't brain drain you. Okay. So my first question for you today on the couch is, there is this interesting stat, or two stats that I've pulled together because I thought it's quite thought-provoking, where apparently, according to Singularity University, we'll be able to reach singularity by 2045, which is 27 years away. And singularity is the point at which technology has evolved beyond human imagination, right? So think that we're immortal, think space travel is just how we travel. And yet there was a report last year that came out of McKinsey and Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg's not-for-profit, that said at the current rate of change, we won't realise diversity in gender in organisations for another 200 years. When I put those two together, I was like, what is up with that? What's your perspective?
Yeah, it's pretty concerning, isn't it, to think that we can be tracking at such an incredible rate from a technology and innovation perspective, and yet there's so much holding us back from a gender inclusion perspective. You know, I think we almost need to start asking a question of technology companies, and that is what are their products going to look like if they're not thinking about women? You know, and the one that comes to mind that I always come back to is the Apple Health app. And I don't know if anybody has looked at it, but when they first released it, you know, this health app is designed to track everything, you know, heart rate, the full works. But clearly there were no women working on it, because what is the number one health challenge that women have, or that we think about?
Weight.
Oh, well, no, it wasn't weight. Menstrual cycle.
Oh.
It's the number
but that's
one
just
reason.
a given. I was thinking...
Number one reason that women go to the GP to get the pill. Yep.
And there was nothing...
Nothing in there. No mention, nothing.
Oh, my God, that's so interesting.
Yep. So if you actually want to make products and services available that women will consume, because presumably we're still going to be consumers of the future of
often we're the priority decision makers in the purchase,
80% of consumer decisions are generally made by women, then I'd say, heck, you need to be talking to us at least, including us in those, you know, the thinking around how it's going to work, when we're going to use it.
And it's so interesting. I've had a number of conversations over the last couple of weeks with some tech innovators, and they said people assume with AI that unconscious bias will be removed. But they're actually saying that AI has all these unconscious bias because it depends on who's programmed it.
Correct.
As to what it does.
It's like air conditioning. So when air conditioning was first developed, the engineers, and this is why women are always freezing in buildings, they set it to be at a temperature that would accommodate a male who was overweight, aged about 41, and wearing a suit. So
I do always feel cold.
Yeah, exactly. It's because the air conditioning is not set to keep us warm, because we weren't in the workforce then.
That's so interesting.
So now these are, you know, interesting examples from the perspective of, look back on history, but there should be by now some really good learnings for leaders within those organisations, and they need to start to crack this, because otherwise I think there are going to be more products like the Apple Health app that need a whole lot of rethinking.
Talk to us a little bit around the macro trends you're observing coming off the back of this unprecedented technological era that we're moving into. So how is what's happening with technology impacting in either a positive or a negative way gender diversity and its progress?
Look, I think one thing that probably concerns me from a trans perspective, I mean, I think it's an opportunity, but it also concerns me in terms of how we get it right, is this shift to the gig economy. And the number of women that are actually moving into the gig economy. You know, over the past 10 years, the number of women that have gone to the gig economy has doubled. And the number one reason that they're moving is for flexibility. In fact, there's some incredible statistic that something like 70% are primary carers. So they're moving for the benefit of flexibility. But what's really concerning, and I think government is now starting to think its way through this, is that something like 85% of them believe that by moving to the gig economy, they will be able to achieve pay equity with men.
But aren't you giving up things like, superannuation, paid leave, all of that?
Paid annual leave, paid carers leave.
So you might get a higher casual rate, so to speak.
Well, even if you think about the average age of a first-time mother in Australia is 29. So, if you're leaving in your early 30s, mid-30s to start up a business, then it's a really hard slog to actually get back to the salary that you were potentially on if you're a senior talent.
Yes.
Or, high potential, as the corporate world likes to describe them.
But it's
you're
funny.
Opting out way before you reach that earnings potential whereby you can actually charge that amount.
But even as someone who's come from that background, it's taken me I reckon it's going to take me 5 years, because I want to invest in my business to scale it, to even get anywhere near the salary that I was on in the corporate world. And that's 5 years of living off my investments.
I hear you, sister.
I hear you. And I'm someone who's been at that executive level, but it's still taken 5 years outside of, so I haven't got contributed to super for 5 years, all of that stuff.
Well, I pay myself a salary so that I am contributing to super, because I'm very consciously aware that otherwise I probably wouldn't. And have set up the self-managed super fund and so forth to make sure that we're, proactively managing that. But, when you talk about salary, absolutely, when you're a startup, you invest, you put everything back into the business and live off the back of an oily rag. And I think we need to think through the potential ramifications for that as a society.
So any other trends that you're observing in the context of, let's go back to this gig economy, because I think it's interesting. I was saying the other day, after attending Pause Fest, I saw all of these amazing companies talking about technology innovations, and it's mind-blowing what they can do. But the more I see these innovations, the more I sit there and ask, one, a lot of society isn't even aware that technology can do this right now. They're not aware of the impacts on their lives. We've got a society that's lonelier than it's ever been. Loneliness has more than doubled in the last 20 years. We've never been more technologically connected, yet humanly disconnected. Mental well-being, is at crisis point, where most people are anxious and overwhelmed. And it feels like there's this beautiful storm that's kind of brewing, from my perspective, where we've got all of these macro technologies being evolved, and no one sat there and looked at how they're all going to play out together. Everything's being developed in isolation. And your point about the gig economy is a beautiful one, because that's one macro impact. And then you overlay all of this other stuff, that's coming. So, artificial intelligence, sex bots. 50% of men in Europe said that they would rather go into a brothel and have sex with a sex bot than with a woman. Like, crazy stuff,
Well, I guess that's similar to the porn. The infiltration of porn has dehumanized in many ways sex and intimacy and love. And, the challenging side of that is that our kids are seeing it from the age of 14.
And also it sets a mindset around how to treat women, doesn't it?
Well, 90% of, full of statistics today, 90% of all porn is violent towards women. Really? So when we look at, and there are different trends you can start to look at, why is the rate of progress so slow in terms of achieving gender equality across a number of different measurements? You have to factor that in. You have to factor in that it's unrestricted. Anyone can access it. Mobiles, advertising, and if kids are saying that by the age of 14, then, of course they're going to look at women in a different way.
So what can women do, in your eyes, to future-proof themselves in the context of where we're heading? What's like one or two hacks that you would recommend?
Look, I think actually thinking through your career. I mean, we ensure that all of our people who work for us, but also every single person that we coach and who works through our platform has a professional vision. Like, know exactly what your professional vision looks like. And start then working towards it. You know, we talk about these the growth steps as being growing edges. What are the growth steps? Doesn't have to be big, just small ones that are going to give you the edge in terms of advancing your career or your life generally towards where you want your professional vision to be. But I think you've also got to continue to educate yourself from an economic perspective. Women are
terrible.
often so crap at finance.
It's the number one fear. So I run Bravery Masterclass. I've run it with over 1,000 women in the last probably 6 months. The number one fear by far and above every other fear is money. Yeah, women won't make change because of money. They're fearful. They're afraid of money. And I just think that it's like, think back through.
But we're good at spending it.
We're great, but I mean, I still can't believe that financial responsibility is not something we teach in schools.
Yeah, I agree.
I just cannot believe that. For me, that's like a fundamental to being, because if you've got financial independence in terms of, creating a life that you love and having choice, it's not about being rich, but it makes a difference.
Well, there's the fabulous site, the Sugar Mama. And the founder of Sugar Mama, she's actually just releasing a book, and she called the $1,000 Challenge. And I think that would be a brilliant sort of thing to put into all schools to actually educate people on how you actually save money and put it away and invest.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I think it's a huge gap for women, and I think it impacts, like you say, it impacts them having sustainable future. It impacts whether they stay in happy or unhappy relationships. People constantly say to me, because I'm so civil with my ex-husband, how is it that you maintained that civil relationship when you've only been divorced for the last 3 years? And I honestly believe, yes, we put our son first, but if I wasn't financially independent, it would never have been as easy as it was, because what the financial conversation would have been very different.
Well, it's a different power
I wasn't
dynamic.
Dependent. But most women are, unfortunately.
Well, the challenge is, what tends to happen is when you have your first baby, so the average age of a first-time mother is about 29, the average age of a first-time father is 33 in Australia. That 4-year age gap translates to a 4-year pay gap. And so most couples make decisions about career and care based on their current financial circumstances, not their potential. And this is why, one of the reasons we continue to revert to that traditional stereotype of primary carer, primary breadwinner. You know, research that came out last week talks about Australia having one of the strongest male breadwinner stereotypes in the world. Which is why when you look at data, like 60% of all men would like to work part-time, there's always a catch in terms of why they won't, provided they can continue to have a meaningful career. Until we get to the point where we are not penalising people for taking carer's leave or being a carer.
Nothing will really, it won't really shift.
It's not going to change.
No. I remember hearing the same thing. They said until men work flexibly, it will never ever work for women in the context of gender diversity at the top levels. Because, I mean, what are the statistics around women carrying? The other thing is, women not only when they've got careers, have that and they have the children, but how much of the work or the percentage of work that's at home that they're also carrying. So no wonder they feel like they're doing 250% of a job.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And it's unsustainable.
We just get exhausted.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done it.
Yeah, I know. Well, which is why I think the peak earning time for women is 39. They're at their peak of their earnings.
I would agree with
at
that.
39.
Yeah.
And then I suspect it just is burnout beyond that. But getting men to work flexibly is actually the key, and it's a really interesting conversation because we do work in that space of particularly at those leadership levels.
Yeah.
And there's a real resistance. Well, why? I don't need to work flexibly. And I always bring it back to the business case. But yes, actually, you do need to work flexibly, because otherwise you don't necessarily believe in all of the different benefits around creativity, innovation that flow from actually stepping outside of, your glass view.
Well, every top entrepreneur that I read about of late, what they do is every quarter they take a week where they totally disconnect from everything. And that's a week to just, as you say, and they say that's where the magic happens for them. That creativity and innovation happens when they disconnect, not when they're in the day-to-day.
Well, I don't know about you, but I mean, when the magic happened for me, when I was pounding pavements with babies in prams, you know, and I had all this time to think, and it was pre-podcast in many ways, so I wasn't even like distracted, plugged into something else, and I would literally be pounding pavements with 2 under 18 months, and I'd started the consultancy, and that's how it all kept on going. I'm like, I can do this, I can scale, and
it's for me, now that I've never been asked that, but when I stepped out of the corporate world and said, bugger this, I've got a young kid, I'm going to take 6 months and work out what I want to do rather than what's expected. And I just spent 6 months having coffee conversations with random strangers. I call it the 100 coffees. Yeah, and so for me, it was just creating that space where I wasn't caught up in the noise of the corporate job and all of that, where the magic happened. Is that interesting? Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Futureproof Couch.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.